Clea 2 is labeled as a skill-based survival horror game and comes out on March 25th, 2021 on the PC, specifically Steam, and the Nintendo Switch. It costs $14.99, but it will have a 20% discount for the first week. And if it looks familiar to you, that's because I streamed the first game in the series on this channel, and it was in my overlooked games of 2019 list. But before I begin this review, this key was obtained from the developer, Invert Mouse, for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So for those who didn't play the first game, Clea is a horror game with a little bit of a different flavor to it. It even says it on the store page. Clea 1 was a jump scare free experience, and tradition continues with the sequel. And that's mostly true about the first and second game, but it's not false in any way. Yeah, that's a contradiction, but more on that in a bit. The gameplay is rather simple. Most of the time, you are sneaking around the various creatures by ducking into closets and using your eyes and ears to give you as much information as possible to avoid them, as you don't have any sort of attack abilities, at least most of the time. You have the ability to run, but that makes noise that monsters will respond to, and you can sneak, but it's at a fraction of your normal walking speed, and sometimes moving faster is better. If playing with a controller, you can hit the left and right bumper to look a little bit in those directions to see if someone's coming or if a hazard is coming up. And if you go to a door, using B allows you to look beyond the door and see what's there, and if an enemy is coming through that door right about now. Getting into the gameplay mechanics, before you start playing this game or even think about playing this game, I need to make this point perfectly clear. See these on the screen? You need a pair of these in order to play this game. Or a really good stereo sound system, I guess, but even then, I'd still recommend these. Yes, even on the Switch, I would recommend this, even though I played this on the PC. In fact, for those who know my enhancer system, here's a quick preview of the enhancer if you don't play with headphones. It's not only absolutely necessary, it's Clea 2's most defining feature, and the most interesting one that makes it stand out in the crowd, its sound design. See, when it comes to the sound in this game, it uses its stereo elements rather strongly. You can hear an enemy coming, and depending on where they are, the appropriate sound will play in your left, right, or both ears, very similar to someone walking in real life near you. And yes, you need to make sure that the L is on the left ear this time, because if it's the other way around, yeah, that becomes a problem. Anyway, you're saying, yeah, Dragnix, that happens in a lot of games. What's so special about that? Well, it also applies sound-wise to the different levels of where your enemy is in the building, not just left and right, but in the distance and on different floors, which is very interesting considering this is, well, a 2D game. So, for example, if they are on a different floor and are above you to the left, you're going to get a sound experience specifically giving you that information, and if you follow it, you can follow where they're walking to in terms of the sound. Maybe the sound will be a little bit more distant, but you will be able to tell. And in particular, you'll be able to tell if they are walking towards a door that you plan on going into to make progress. And if you walk through that door and they just so happen to be walking toward that door that you go through, there's no invincibility period here. You can get captured even before the animation of closing the door is done, depending on where they are. So walking through things recklessly will get you in trouble and most likely killed, because, well, if the main baddie of an area touches you, it's game over. Now, I could give you an example, show a clip from the game and go over what I'm hearing and what information that is giving me, but I'm not going to for one specific reason. It's one of the strengths of the game, learning its mechanics, learning how specific sounds give you information. More than the left and right thing, knowing what the volume level is and how the volume travels up and down could tell you the layout of how a person is walking and how a creature is walking in the building. Learning the tricks and understanding what the sound is telling you is a huge part of this game, and giving you tips or giving you hints on that, even if you go and look up a guide or something, I don't think that is a great experience for the game. It's all about just feeling the tension from this sound design, and quite frankly, it still sticks with me from the original game. And yeah, I understand that this is the second game, and that's where things get a little bit tricky. Yeah, I knew how the sound design worked in the first game, and not much has changed here in terms of that sound design. The system is pretty much the same. Sure, the levels are different and the layout is different, but in essence, I'm using the same information. And yeah, it isn't as good, not because the design isn't good, it's because I didn't have that learning experience. Now, I mentioned the jump scares thing earlier, and that's true. There are no traditional jump scares. But if you're not paying attention and you end up going through a door without looking, or you're not paying attention to the sound and walk right into the path of another creature, it can jump scare you. Not in a traditional sense, but it can get you out of your seat. And well, that did happen to me at least once. This causes the tension to go through the roof in conjunction with the limited save system that the game has as a recommended option. Even early on in the game, you won't have one task and be able to save if you make a tiny bit of progress. It'll be several tasks all in a row, and you'll only have one candle to be able to save with, so you'll have to make a decision on when or if you want to save during that point. Especially if you're concerned with even getting back to the save point in the first place. So you're on edge a good amount of the time. And that's what Clea 2 does best. Tension. Enemies are smart enough to react to you. Start running and they'll go right to the spot you started running at. They have paths that mostly stay on the same track and have a pattern that you can exploit, but those patterns are tight enough where even if you do get past them once, you're going to come in contact with them again rather quickly and have to deal with a slight different variation of the same situation. Now, when it comes to the variation in those states, that's where Clea 2 starts to stumble a little bit. Most of what you need to do is basically the old keycard game from 90s FPS games. Find the one key to open the next door you need to move on. And in many cases, that path to the next spot is rather linear most of the time, although it turns non-linear when you have to deal with the enemy that can grab you and you have to go back and forth in that path. Why it stumbles a bit is that puzzle-wise, I feel like the game could have done more to test the player. Sure, there's slight puzzles here and there, where you have to grab a specific badge in order to put another badge into that badge slot, and you have to use the whole, okay, rock, paper, scissors thing. But most of the puzzles here are straightforward and self-explanatory. They're not going to test your brain limits. I remember the paintings in the first game and the symbols that you had to figure out, and I really wish there was more puzzles like that in this game where I had to use my head more than just avoiding enemies. And I understand that they're wanting the tension of the enemies to be the focal point here, but I feel like the game could have pushed new mechanics a little bit more to push the player a little bit more, or to just make things a little bit different than the first game. There's also a pseudo-sanity system. If you get cut and you notice it on your character, that means they're susceptible to illusions or things that are happening in the world that can end up actually taking you out. Creatures will appear in front of you that aren't actually real, but if you run into them, it's sort of like the chaos takes control of you, and thus you sort of go insane, and thus you die. Now, in my playthrough through the dark difficulty, which is the standard difficulty, that barely came up. They give you enough potions to be able to recover the cuts rather easily, and the fact of the matter is that there's only one section that I really had a problem with it, and that was me sort of forcing the problem on itself. Now, in the Chaos difficulty, yeah, I could see that being a bigger problem, and that's unlocked after you beat the regular difficulty, but the initial start of the game, I feel like the could have been pushed a little bit more and be a little bit more aggressive in terms of that sanity system. Now, those who are concerned about game time in terms of their purchase decision, it took me about 4 to 5 hours to beat the regular campaign. It actually took me 90 minutes based on just the time card at the end of the game that comes up with your rank, but a lot of the time is spent reloading saves after you lose. Remember the save system that I talked about. You may lose 10 to 15 minutes of progress at a time if you get caught based on how the game is designed. And yeah, that can be frustrating for some people to the point where I wouldn't recommend the game for them, but it's part of the design. The fact is, you're supposed to get frustrated and you're supposed to feel that tension. But you do have unlocked content here. You do get extra costumes for hitting specific ranks. You have an arcade mode which has you gather medals while doing the main story. A little bit strange, but it works for some people. And you have the Chaos and Chaos Plus difficulties, which ramp up the challenge. So in terms of the price of the game and the amount of content you get, I do feel it's appropriate, especially for the type of content that you're getting here. And while there seems to be multiple endings, there's not a lot of variation in the gameplay at that point. What I mean by that is that when it comes to the optional objectives, there's only seemingly maybe 1 or 2 that I could easily identify that if I went back, maybe things could have changed a little bit, getting an extra key, so on and so forth. So it doesn't seem to add a whole lot there, and playing through the game that's mostly linear otherwise doesn't sound that great, other than seeing an end of the story that's a little bit different, but you've got save files that you can deal with there. But let's move on and talk a little bit about the game's presentation and how that translates to atmosphere. Clea 2 isn't typical in its use of horror tropes. Sure, it's got things like eyeballs and tentacles out of the ground, but when it also comes to the locations, it's mostly grounded. Ship-like interiors, houses, caves, fourth dimension, okay, maybe a little bit out there at times. But the solid color usage, along with the way characters pop against the environment, leads to a unique look for the game. It's somewhere between Paper Mario and an anime. That's not a statement that I thought I would say ever, but okay. When you're sneaking around, Florine can feel a little stiff walking around at first. She looks a little bit awkward. But there's nothing wrong with the walking animation, and in fact, it actually adds to the unworldly feel. Even with some of the environments feeling a little bit more grounded, the combination of the characters and the sound and presentation as a whole adds to a weird combination of unworldly yet grounded. It's strange, yet it's sort of mesmerizing in a way. But again, the game's presentation gets enhanced when the tension ramps up. When you're starting to get close to a creature, your audible heartbeat will start to get louder and louder, and the screen can start to develop a dark circle around the screen, making you more nervous as you lose even more of your precious sight. Where's the creature? Where is it? I don't know where it is. I can't trust my own senses. That's the kind of things that go on through your head, and yes, some people are not going to like that, and if you don't, well, you're probably not this far in the review anyway. But those who want that tension, yeah, you're going to feel it here, even after the 5th, 6th, 10th time that you experience it. Now, normally I don't take this long to mention story elements of a game that I'm playing, but in my mind, it takes a semi-back seat to the gameplay in the Clea series, even if there is a lore and story developed here. In Clea 2, you play as Florine, a maid of the Whitlock mansion of the first game, and you're trying to resurrect your master, just so happens is related to the first game. In conjunction with that, you're working with this family who's seemingly trying to open a gate to unleash the War Maiden, which isn't Cthulhu, but basically is a stand-in for Cthulhu, sort of, kind of. It all has to deal with chaos. There's several side characters and everything is fully voice acted here, and competently to boot. Although, some of the emotion does seem to get drowned out with the way that the audio is implemented here. I can't say it's the voice actors, it's just something about the way the audio comes out that seems to sort of drain it. Here's an example cutscene to show what I'm talking about.
Too kind for your own good, Dragonfae.
Why, hello, Florence. You did good in the Dark Realm, but this time, I'll be the star. See these gloves? I found them in Maid's room.
Nancy, no. Those gloves are dangerous.
I love the Chaos gloves. They're so good. Catch me if you can, Florence.
It's Florine.
What bothers me about the story more than anything else is how much of a backseat it takes to everything else. I understand that this game is focusing on the tension gameplay and the presentation more than anything else, but it's obvious that lore was developed here. There's segments that you come across to give you a little bit of information, and there are characters that have personalities and that are defined, but you don't get a lot of them. You don't get a lot of the story. You don't get a lot of Florine even as you're playing as Florine. It's just that with all the horror elements of this game, I expected the story to be a little bit more involved. And it's on par with the first game of what I played with it, and yet for some reason I thought it would just expand here a little more, and it didn't. And if you ask me if you need to play the first game in order to understand the story, no, but yes. The fact is that Clea 2 is a self-contained story. When it connects to the first game, it's generic enough with the descriptions of what's happening that you get an idea of what happened, but maybe not necessarily the detail. But then that also sort of takes away from the fact that those who played the first game may not necessarily catch those little details that you really want to see in a sequel. Sure, characters show up from the first game at certain points. Sure, certain elements show up from the first game at certain points, but they're so disconnected at times that I feel like they're there just for the sake of them being there and it being part of the series. This could have been a whole different story unconnected to the first game, in my opinion, and it still would have worked. In the end, Clea 2 is a little bit more of what made Clea 1 so interesting. The fact is, the tension and the sound system is something unique to the genre that I haven't played before, and is something that especially newcomers to the series will really appreciate, especially if you just want to feel the shivers down your spine as an enemy gets closer and closer to you. Clea 2 is more of the same, however. There's nothing unique compared to Clea 1 in the end, and yes, it's got some additional modes, and the story is an extension of the universe in question, but not in a way where you have to play it if you played the first game. It's just that if you enjoyed the first game, you'll probably enjoy the second game. So, my final score for Clea 2 is an 82 out of 100. Making it a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. However, that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and puts scores on them to try to match the game to you. If you strongly fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that enhancer to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see where the game lies in the buyability rating for you. As you can see, you need to buy headphones if you don't have them if you want to play this game, especially for the Switch. But other than that, it really depends on what kind of horror player you are. And the fact is, it's not going to be for everybody. But for those who really want that tension, yeah, the game's going to work for you. Now, due to the fact that I requested the game and I did receive a key for the game, I will be giving a copy of the game away. Those keys are more so for early access more than anything else and not necessarily related to money. The fact is, Earlier access means I can get a review out on the day it comes out rather than, a week afterward. But in order for you to be qualified in order to get the key, you need to do two things. One, you need to join the Discord in the description below. Yes, I ask you to join the Discord. You can leave after I give it away in a week, but it just makes it easier to find people to give the game away. The fact is that if I'm playing email tag with someone, it could take a lot longer. And two, you need to leave a comment on this video. Specifically, what kind of horror experiences that are a little bit out there in the indie market have you experienced and that you can recommend? Or something that will make this review series better. Some feedback on the actual review in question. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out. I don't know what I'm going to review next. And yeah. See you later.